Good afternoon, everybody. We are really happy to have you here in the session that IRI is organizing. This is a side event with the title Climate Neutrality and Biodiversity, Renewables, Reporting Standards, and Sustainable Finance. The session is organized by IRI. This is the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. This is the biggest scientific association with environmental economists with more than 1,500 members from 85 different countries. And I am honored to be the president-elect of the association. The side event is co-organized with the Global Reporting Initiative, which is a provider of best practice for impact reporting, and they are going to be connecting with us. Also, Next Energy Capital, a solar investment specialist and asset management company. Deutsche Bank, the Global Investment Office of Deutsche Bank is here with us, and also the Flores School of Regulation and Climate of the European University Institute, the Land, Environment, Economics and Policy Institute of Exeter Business School, and two institutes that I direct, the Research Laboratory on Socioeconomic and Environmental Sustainability at the Athens University of Economics and Business, and the Sustainable Development Unit at Athena Research and Innovation Center, focusing on information technology and in particular on the green and digital solutions for the transition to sustainability. So this COP is about trying to get the 195 member states agreeing to climate neutrality by 2050. We are at a point in time that we are facing the climate crisis, but at the same time, we are also facing biodiversity collapse. That's another crisis. And in this session, we want to talk about the trade-offs between the transition to a climate-neutral energy sector and land use sector and mobility sector, and at the same time protecting biodiversity, protecting the ecosystems, the ecosystem services on which all these productive and consumptive activities are based on. So the European Association of Environmental and Resource Economists is providing the scientific framework and background in which we can think about these trade-offs, and it's also providing the policy business science interface that is going to help in implementing the sustainability transition while integrating the trade-off between the energy, climate neutrality and biodiversity. So that's why we have representatives from the financial sector and the business sector that are going to talk about sustainable finance and in the context of EU taxonomy, and they are going to talk about reporting standards in the context of the new proposal for the EU sustainability, corporate sustainability reporting. So this is what we want to do. If you have any questions, you can use Slido. There's going to be a code to scan. You can send your questions, and we will try to make this session as interactive as possible. So our first speaker is connected with us virtually, and is Simone Pocresi, a dear colleague, a dear friend from the European University Institute and the University of Siena, professor and director of the Flores School of Regulation and Climate. Simon is going to talk about energy systems transition. Simone?
Thank you, Phoebe. Thank you. It's a pleasure to break the ice and start this session. As the title of my intervention suggests, I would like to discuss the link between climate neutrality, energy transition, and biodiversity, stressing the possible synergies and trade-offs among them, and also some policy instruments that can reconcile the sometimes conflicting goals of these variables. Let me first start from the first and the third, climate and biodiversity. Next slide, please. Next bullet point. Thank you. So we all know that climate change and biodiversity are two major challenges, but they are also strictly interconnected. Indeed, the recent global assessment report on biodiversity in 2019 estimates that climate change might cause the extinction of 1 million species in the next decades. And over 1/4 of all existing species, around 8.7 million existing species, could have to migrate from their natural environment due to global warming. Moreover, the lack of genetic diversity makes crops more vulnerable to parasites and diseases, which pose food security at risk. Now, climate change and biodiversity are so two sides of the same coin. But what about the third element, the energy transition? Climate change requires to accelerate the energy transition, but this sometimes clashes, so to speak, with the biodiversity targets. For instance, think of large solar power installations, systems, and offshore wind farms that may alter the habitat of several species and endangering their survival or forcing them to migrate. So to reconcile the possible conflicting goals of renewables and biodiversity, we need to optimize the spatial distribution of renewables. But we also need to, change and shift from a separate to common policy instruments and planning. For this purpose, in my view, an important role can be played by market-based instruments, because they provide a general framework that can address each of the three problems. For instance, by increasing carbon prices, emission trading system contribute to address climate change and shift and accelerate the energy transition. But similarly, water abstraction or water pollution rights that then be used in several countries can help protect the water basins and the species living there. And cap and trade system can also be applied to protect aquatic species from overfishing, setting a total allowable catch and then allowing access rights to be exchanged. Also, debt for nature swaps can be an important instrument, provide another example of how financial instruments can effectively contribute to protect biodiversity. Debt for nature swaps are financial mechanisms that allow parts of the developing countries' foreign debt to be forgiven in exchange of biodiversity conservation programs. And since 1984, over $3 billion have been generated in biodiversity conservation funds in developing countries. So in a way, this instrument can address simultaneously multiple crises: the sovereign debt crisis of the developing countries, the climate change crisis, and the biodiversity crisis. So providing, so to speak, a triple dividend, the dream of any economist. I'm fully aware that there are criticisms, there may be some possible limitations, and we have to learn more on their applications. But I believe that these instruments are very promising to reconcile the economic and ecological needs. And I also believe that the financial crisis due to the pandemic we are going through provides a unique opportunity to accelerate and extend this kind of instruments and their application. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simone. Very important points, and I hope we will have some time for discussion of alternative instruments that are relevant. I'm very happy to call Ian Bateman, Professor and Director of Land, Environment, Economics and Policy Institute at the University of Exeter Business School, and of course the Chief Editor-in-Chief of the official journal of the European Association of Environmental and Resource Environmental and Resource Economics. Ian will talk about land use and land use change. Ian?
That's great, thank you. I'm going to find it difficult to sit down because I tend to get very excited about these sort of things. Anyway, couple of key points I'm trying to get over here. First of all, that if we're making decisions to do with the environment, we need to bring into analysis all of the consequences of change. We can't carry on just looking at one thing. That's what took us down, all the problems that we've had with regard to agriculture over the last 30, 40 years. Just looking at one thing. If we're changing the land, for example, with regard to climate, planting forests, for example, that sort of stuff, we also need to think about the fact that it's going to affect biodiversity, water systems, all those sort of things. Second point is, where you do these things really, really matters. The environment is not a flat billiard table. Doing the same thing in different places produces massively different results. And the final thing that I want to stress in this little talk is we can already do this. We have had enough advances in science and in economics and in the joining up of the two to already make much better decisions than we made in the past. The tools are already there, mainly they just need to be used. So if we kick off, I'm going to, hello, yes. That's my secret signal for the next slide. Oh, you can't see me. You can just see my slide. I'll sit down.
You can actually use this.
Can I?
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. Excellent. Great. Okay. So I'm going to use this. Right. So land use. Land use is the product of at least three big things: policy, markets, and the environment. Okay. That's why land is the way it is. And it generates a whole range of values. And it's the ones that turn up in the market that tend to dominate with regard to decisions. But there's a whole other raft of values that are incredibly important with regard to sustainability and people's well-being. And we can now measure all of these. Many of them, we can even turn them into economic values, but I'm going to say not all, but I'll show you how we get around that particular problem using this example. So the UK has committed to net zero carbon by 2050. And one of the big elements of that is they're going to plant a lot of forestry. 750,000 hectares of forestry on this very small, cold, wet island. So it's going to improve the environment here if we get it in the right place. The problem is, in the past, what we do is we just leave it to the market. We just throw a big load of money onto the table and say, oh, great, you can now get some money for planting trees. Who's going to pick that money up? Well, it'll be the people with the lowest agricultural values, not the people who can, for example, do the best for storing carbon or improving biodiversity. And so if you do that, you end up with forests in some really bad places. On peatlands, where they're actually going to emit more carbon than they store, on areas which are actually very fragile for biodiversity. And when you bring all this together, you find out that the costs of doing this are not even going to be matched by the benefits generated. We would be better not planting these forests, okay? But there is a different way to do it, and I'm very pleased to say this has been adopted by the Treasury here in the UK in the latest guidelines. That's called the Green Book Treasury Guidelines, and that is an approach often referred to as the natural capital approach, where all of these benefits and costs are included within the analysis. How do we do that? Well, actually, a lot of them, you can actually put values on them, quite robust values. But the one that both myself and the Green Book agree you can't robustly value is biodiversity. We don't understand the science of how biodiversity contributes to ecosystem functioning, and we definitely don't understand the values associated with it. So instead we use a very simple alternative, and that is to prevent any investment in areas which are going to have any negative effects upon biodiversity, moving the forests away from them. Through this simple means, and adding that in as a constraint to all the other values, we actually radically change where we plant. We plant in areas that are good for biodiversity, that actually store carbon rather than emitting it. Also areas that generate great recreation for people. And when we then value all that, we find that this is a great investment, just like we kind of know it must be, but only if you consider everything and you put things in the right place. We've now got decision support tools. These are actually open access. Anybody can go and just Google LEAP and Nevo and you'll find it and you can play with it yourself. And these are being used by some areas of government, sadly not all of them. It really should be. And they're telling you about things like this, that you can choose any area you want. You can do a grid square or a natural area like a catchment, and you can look at all the changes that would happen if you altered policy. For example, changes in agriculture, production and values, changes in the water environment, but also all the other things. Okay, so we can do this. We just need to start using the tools that are available. Thank you, Phoebe.
And educating the people that have to need to use these tools, because
Yes.
they are not straightforward, are they?
People aren't, no. Tools are pretty easy, actually.
I want to come back later on about the non-robustness of valuing ecosystem services and whether we want to go that road or there is no way road. But yes. Now I'm going to give you some background on marine, seas, and oceans management. So if I can have my presentation. So at the moment, I direct a cluster of research institutions and networks that are really working on the multiple crises that we are facing: the COVID, the economic recession, the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and basically. We try to identify science-driven pathways, technological pathways, financial pathways, and policy pathways that can really accelerate the transition to climate neutrality, climate resilience, biodiversity neutrality, biodiversity resilience, and at the same time achieving positive growth multipliers and social cohesion. So very quickly, what we have on the table, and these are the policies that are helping us, are the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, the European Green Deal, the Next Generation EU within EU, which is giving us an additional 750 billion for investing in green and digital transition. And together with the budget of the European Green Deal, it's a lot of money, a lot of fiscal space to actually start investing in the infrastructure needed and in the transformational change needed for the green and digital transition. And of course, this year is a very hectic year with regulations. It's the climate law. First time we have climate CO2 and greenhouse gas emission reductions put into law, these commitments becoming legal. We have the EU taxonomy. Some of our panel members will give some information on how we try to translate that into an operational framework for our financial sector, but also for businesses and companies. We have the Fit for 55 package of measure, a major revision of regulations and additional regulations and laws that are there to accelerate accelerate the transition to a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 of at least 55%, and by 2050 climate neutrality. And of course, we have quite significant momentum across the world. It's not just the European Union, it's also around the world that we have commitments with regards to climate neutrality, 2050, China 2060, India 2070, but not yet putting these commitments into really pathways and policy frameworks and legal frameworks and regulatory frameworks that are going to actually allow the implementation. With regards, so within this framework, what we are doing with the seas and oceans, we have this Sustainable Euro-Asian Seas Initiative focusing on sustainable marine resource management. And if you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network report, SDG 14 is one of the less implemented SDGs across the world. You can see the map. If you don't see any green, it means that this SDG has not been achieved anywhere. And you can see many reds, where basically means that you really have the worst management of marine resources that you can have. So this is a very difficult SDG, and what we try to do in this initiative is to focus on the major Euro-Asian seas, the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea, the Caspian, and the Aral Sea, and create research, education, innovation, data management, and policy reform structures that will allow us to create and actually co-create with the relevant stakeholders. And with the science, of course, this is a science-driven approach, systemic pathways for the technological transition, the financial transition, the policy transition of oceans and seas. So this is a huge effort being supported by many projects that is trying to figure out a sustainable transition pathways for our resources. Our approach is source to sea approach. So we start from the river basin, we go to the coast, and we end up in the sea, and we follow to the ocean. It's a dynamic geospatial systems analysis approach with a stakeholder co-creation. And of course, it takes into account the relevant policies that are there, because they are very important in mobilizing the co-creation of the pathway. So we take into account the Water Framework Directive for the river basins, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, marine spatial planning. Space is very important. It's not just time and long-term planning, but it's also space. Agenda, UN 2030, SDG 6 about water and sanitation, SDG 14 about oceans and seas, SDG 15 about land use, and SDG 13 climate action. And of course, we take into account for the European seas this great mission area on healthy ocean seas, coastal and inland waters that is really changing the framework in which European seas are managed, by giving seed funding, by creating lighthouses at sea and river basins gate to implement the mission, by establishing restoration and conservation parks, the so-called blue parks, and also supporting effective water management through a digital knowledge system and creating a European twin ocean. Our framework is very holistically looking at the supply side, the demand side. The supply side is the technology, the geospatial modeling, but also the renewables, the circular economy technology, nature-based solution, the digital solutions, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all the sensors. The demand side is about understanding people preferences and bringing the two sides together in a very systemic framework, simulating solutions using complexity science and co-creating the instruments that are going to allow the dynamic implementation of these solution pathways. So we are working on many different aspects of the transformation of the sea, marine spatial planning, marine conservation, ocean CO2 capture and ecosystem services conservation, shipping, ports, transportation, fisheries and aquaculture, offshore energy production, the data and intelligence-driven base science, technology, policy making that we need in order to really have the policies that can accelerate the transition, the whole aspect of blue economy, and of course blue tech with a very big accelerator on maritime relevant startups that are providing solutions for climate adaptation and climate mitigation in the marine industry. We also have other sections that are also relevant for the marine transformation that have to do with projects that concentrate on energy decarbonization, sustainable industry, and sustainable cities and communities, and of course the digital revolution. Another very relevant aspect is water, food, energy nexus, because what happens inland and on the river basin goes to the sea as well. Many projects there as well trying to identify the different structures that can really mobilize the transition. And lastly, we work a lot on innovation acceleration through the EIT Climate Kick Hub that is accelerating startups that are relevant for the transition to climate neutrality, but also trying to give these startups the connection with the VCs and funding and financial sector that they need in order to achieve financial sustainability and get to clients and be able to deploy their technologies in order to really bring them in the market and be used for the transition to sustainability. That's all from me. And now we go to our next speakers, who are partners in this side event. They are the Global Reporting Initiative. They are connecting virtually. And this initiative is a really pioneering provider for best practices for impact investing. And Peter Paul van der Wies, if I pronounce that well, Peter, you can say your name again to make sure that everybody gets it right. And
Peter Paul van der Wies.
Excellent. And Peter is the Chief External Affairs Officer of the Global Reporting Initiative. Peter, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Phoebe, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Sorry that we can't be in Glasgow with you. To speak here today, and it's an honor to be co-organizing this session. And I want to specifically also thank the EU Pavilion for hosting us today. I don't know the Global Reporting Initiative. We are an independent international organization that helps businesses take responsibility for their impacts by providing them with language to communicate those impacts. We provide the world's most widely used standards for sustainability reporting. Without a doubt, the private plays a key role in achieving the goals set out in the Paris Agreement. And here at COP26, we will focus on how sustainability reporting can inform decision-making, faster action on climate change. And when we talk about corporate reporting, we refer to a comprehensive corporate reporting system with two pillars. Robust sustainability and financial reporting are on equal footing. The sustainability pillar, under which GRI sits, addresses a company's external impact in the environment, while the financial pillar needs to reflect sustainability risks at the company's value level. So when talking about companies accountable for their climate impacts here at COP26, it is absolutely key that we do not decouple the climate agenda from the broader sustainability agenda. Bateman started off the session with exactly that same poll. By the way, I did love his tie with the climate change development on it, as a side note. The GRI Standards give companies the opportunity to address sustainable development in a holistic manner, demonstrating their impact on the world around them, both when it comes to environmental issues, and not at least considering all stakeholders. This multi-stakeholder approach is deeply embedded in our standard setting process, safeguards through a strict multi-stakeholder due process, our standards. If we achieve net zero emissions by overlooking rights or fail to, what will this mean for the well-being of the people and the planet? It's not a matter of either or. We need to achieve net zero emissions and we need broader sustainability in the process. It will only be through concerted and connected action on both fronts that we can seize the opportunities for an inclusive future for all. Therefore, I'm very pleased to be joined today by my colleague Harold Powells, who's the Director of Standards. I'll hand it over to him so he can give you upcoming work on the revision of the GRI Biodiversity Standards. Harold?
Thank you very much, Peter Paul, and thank you for the introduction and also for the organization the opportunity to present an update on the revision of the GRI topic standard for biodiversity reporting, which we will be developing in the upcoming 12 months. And I think there was some slides.
Yes, we can see your slides.
The GRI standard is developed years ago to enable organizations to publicly disclose its most significant impact on biodiversity and how the organizations manages them. This was really the first global biodiversity standard designed to help companies to measure, understand, and address their impact. Multiple reports nowadays underline that biodiversity-related risk is an aspect of corporate reporting that is insufficiently developed and requires rapid upscaling. With the GRI Biodiversity Reporting Standard, developed years ago, there is now a need to review this standard to bring it up to date and in line with latest developments. Next slide, please. The GRI Standard enables any organization, whether you're large, whether you're small, private or public, to understand and report on their impacts on the economy, on the environment, and on people in a comparable and credible way, thereby increasing transparency on the contribution to sustainable development. In addition to reporting companies, the standards are highly relevant to many stakeholders, including investors, policymakers, governments, capital markets, and civil society. The topic standard for biodiversity is part of the most widely adopted global disclosure framework for sustainable reporting. This comprehensive reporting framework is built upon a modular set of standards, delivering an inclusive picture of an organization's material topics, their related impacts, and how they are managed. This modular set consists of a universal standards, the GRI 1, 2, and 3, the sector standards, and the topic standards. The universal standards do incorporate reporting on human rights and environmental due diligence in line with intergovernmental expectations. And the universal standards apply to all organizations, always. The sector standards enable more consistent reporting on sector-specific impacts, like for mining or oil and gas. And finally, the topic standards list disclosures relevant to a particular topic, like biodiversity. Next slide, please. So the GRI standards represent global best practices for reporting sustainable performance, as Peter Paul said, enhancing the comparability and quality of information. And we do build upon the best practices and do cooperate with relevant organizations to ensure alignment and to avoid reinventing the wheel. Our network extends across the entire world, stakeholder groups and sustainability teams. What is very important is that we operate through a robust multi-stakeholder approach, ensuring participation and expertise of diverse range of stakeholders in the development of the standards. We have defined, therefore, the constituency groups we work with to develop new reporting guidance across the business, civil society, financial markets, labor, mediation institutions, and academia. We also ensure this multi-stakeholder input throughout the process by a public consultation period, plus an in-depth stakeholder workshops all over the world. Next slide, please. The GRI standards are created and issued by our Global Sustainability Standards Board, the GSSB. This is the GRI's independent standard setting body. These standards are developed according to a formally defined due process that is designed to ensure that the GRI standards reflect global best practice in sustainability and promote the public interest and move through a clearly communicated and transparent development process. All these projects start with project identification and are followed by a prioritization and commencement. This is continued with the content development, ending in the public exposure period of about 90 days. And after consideration of the feedback, we conclude with the launch of our final standard. For biodiversity, the Global Sustainable Standards Board identified the revision of this standard was a priority project for our work program. And in the next 2 weeks, the multi-stakeholder technical committee on biodiversity will be formally appointed by our GSSB. This technical committee will consist of about 20 experts representing the businesses, the civil society, financial market, labor, mediation institutions, and academia. We do cooperate throughout this process with other initiatives, like, for example, the CDP, the former Carbon Disclosure Project, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, TNFD, and the Science-Based Target Network. And as announced recently this summer, for the review of the standards, we do work in close cooperation and co-creation with the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, EFRAG. This month, we will start the scoping and the content development, and the draft will be made available for public comment in April, May next year, 2022. And as explained, the objective of the review of the standard is really to include the latest insights on the relevant disclosures for biodiversity. We will bring the content of this standard in line with international agreed best practices and relative authoritative intergovernmental instruments, and with recent developments in the field of biodiversity. I will speed a little bit up to make sure we stay into the time. To give at least also an idea on what we discussed with the experts in the technical committee, for example, we identify gaps or new insights when it comes to biodiversity disclosures. We also discuss what we expect of an organization to disclose these days, bearing in mind that it should be applicable to any organization and it should contribute to outside world and decision-making based on these disclosures. Furthermore, we will discuss what drivers of biodiversity loss should be covered. Based on all these discussions, we will do in several meetings, we will draft our new biodiversity standard. So to summarize, next slide. The global investors, civil society groups, labor organizations, academia, and other stakeholders have all signaled us their backing for the revision of this biodiversity standard, as it will help address the growing demand for transparency. So to remember, the review of the standard will start this month, and we expect to publish the draft standard for public comment in April, May 2022. And we plan to launch the standard in October 2022. I'm sure you want to have more information, and please contact us via biodiversity@globalreporting.org or via our website, globalreporting.org. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Harold. This is very interesting, and especially what you are doing with the Commission. We want to know more about that. What exactly are you contributing to the different standards and the corporate sustainability directive that the Commission is finalizing now and bringing to the Parliament, the European Parliament. I am very happy now to introduce Shane Swords.
Correct.
Is it good? Yeah?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Managing Director, Head of Investor Relations at Next Energy Capital. And he will be talking about the importance of biodiversity for ESG investors and how to achieve biodiversity gains.
Great. Thank you very much, Phoebe. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. So what we want to talk about is investors' role in this, and the role investors can play in impact investing, ESG investing, and also biodiversity as well. I think it's very, very important at the moment. So as a company, we invest into solar projects, just solar projects on behalf of pension funds, high net worth sovereign wealth funds, etc. Sustainability is obviously key for us, very, very important for us. We have our own sustainability framework. We align ourselves with 3 pillars of the UN SDGs. That's human rights, climate change, and biodiversity. So in terms of biodiversity, which is obviously the key topic here, we think solar projects are an excellent opportunity for biodiversity. When you have a solar project in a field, it takes up less than 5% of the land in that particular field. So this creates a lot of opportunities for that. In the UK, where we have a number of projects, we have a team that works on this. We also work with specialists in relation to this. We are also very much aligned with the UK government's 25-year environmental plan. Some examples of what we do is we have sheep grazing on some of our projects. We have beehives, we have wildflowers growing, we have chamomile and a number of other measures that are very, very important for investors. What we see at the moment is when we have investors doing due diligence on any of our funds, there's a very, very big focus now at the moment in terms of ESG and also biodiversity. And we're getting more and more questions. We provide a lot of reporting in relation to ESG, in relation to biodiversity. And interestingly, some investors recently have been asking a lot of questions about that and actually have their own requirements in terms of reporting as well, which has been very interesting for us. So I suppose one of the main things that we're seeing at the moment is that there seems to be an increased interest from the pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, etc., that we deal with in terms of renewable energy and in terms of biodiversity. And we've had some investors, contacting us again that we haven't spoken to in a while. And it would appear to us that investors are looking to perhaps increase their allocation towards renewable energy, which we obviously think is very, very important given the current climate. Thank you very much. And I'll now pass you over to Michael Bonte-Friedheim, who's the CEO and founder of Next Energy Capital.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Phoebe. If I may, let me take a step back and give you the view from a practitioner's point of view. We've heard a lot about policy, academia. Next Energy Capital has about 1,500 megawatts of solar assets spread throughout the world. We have about 300 individual solar assets positioned in countries going from Portugal to Chile to the US, India, Poland, Italy, the UK, and Spain. So we kind of span the world. When we talk about the nexus between affordability, between public policy, between energy transition, between impact on biodiversity, what we've a little bit heard is that there might be a conflict. From the solar practitioner's perspective, there is no conflict. Because as we build today a solar asset, the power that we generate from that solar plant is cheaper than any other source of power generation today. So it's affordable. It's more affordable than any other power generation technology. Now, many naysayers will say you can't power a country by solar alone, and we know that, but that's not the point. The point is solar is a big part of the solution to net zero climate change and so on. As we talk about the impact on biodiversity of a solar asset, as Shane was saying, you have to picture a 20 football field size piece of land, low grade agricultural use. The farmer, bless him, twice a year, he takes his tractor and his till and he drives over the land. And of course, it's a nice open land, in particular in the UK. And all the insect life, the small mammals, the local fauna, of course, succumbs to that tilling process. We take that land and we put a nice fence around those 20 football fields and we build our solar asset and we create a biodiversity island where we can attract insect life, and we actually facilitate that through concrete steps by inserting or putting in place beehives, or my team likes to call it insect hotels, where actually we attract insect life. We leave space between a lot of the fences for the small mammals to repopulate. And as Shane was saying, there's a lot of extra space where we can foster the local fauna. So you actually have a solar asset that produces power at less than other forms of electricity, which actually fosters the biodiversity in that area. So it's a plus. So as you expand that and you say, okay, what about this reporting? We're talking about how do you report those things? If, as a mission-driven organization, I don't need to report them, because that, our mission as a organization is to create a more sustainable future by leading the transition to clean energy. So we're already, philosophically, we're there. We have a foundation that does very cool things on the side. As a group of people, 200 of us in the firm today, we're already focused on that. So as we talk about reporting, how do we quantify that? The reason I'm so interested, and one of the reasons we're here, we are so interested in this quantification effort, is because it allows me to show even better to the world, to investors, the advantages of renewable energy, in particular solar, compared to other forms of land use, power generation, or whatever other things we're talking about in terms of biodiversity loss, affordability of energy, and so on. And so I wanted to take a moment to give you that vision from on the ground, someone that has teams across the globe pushing forward this agenda without, to date, really having that policy support. It's the organizations like mine, like so many that are probably following us online, like the investors, as Shane was saying, that back us because they see the financial return, but not only the financial return, because their stakeholders increasingly are asking the tough question. It's not only about financial returns. How do we quantify the return on natural capital, or the loss of return on natural capital as we destroy it from many other perspectives? So we're all for quantification, like the GRI Institute policy actually implementing a hard data calculation, because it allows us to present ourselves in the right light, which is not driven by our team's efforts. We know what the right thing is, we're doing it, but obviously policy can help us improve, progress, accelerate that deployment, in our case, of solar power across the world.
Very nice, very nice. And if you have land use explicitly spelled out in different countries, then it is so much easier for you to go there and deploy your technology, and at the same time showcase whether you are caring for biodiversity, and even monetize the lower footprint of your deployment on the environment. So basically, it would be really nice to have this hybrid reporting from your company and companies like you that will join the two narratives, how financially successful the investments are, but at the same time, what is their footprint on the environment and on creating jobs and social cohesion. And that would be an opportunity for you. This is what I'm trying to tell the companies as well. You said it very nicely. And now we have the financial sector, the real financial sector. Markus Müller, Managing Director, Global Head of and Chief Investment of the Investment Office of Deutsche Bank. So you are the Chief Investment Officer?
No.
No. What are you?
I'll explain you later what it means.
Okay. Okay. Because it's kind of.
It's interesting title.
Yeah.
So may I have the remote for my
course.
slides? Perfect.
Sure.
Thank you very much, Phoebe.
Thank you.
So it's a privilege for me to be here because it's the first time the Deutsche Bank joins a COP. And for me, it's especially important because in the Chief Investment Office, we put a focus on secular trends, or better to say, secular transformations. And the question around sustainability, or ESG as we call it, is one of those secular structural shifts. The challenge with those secular structural shifts is that it happens in two phases. One phase, very slowly, without any recognition of us, and then suddenly, very rapidly, and we can't do anything about it or against it as society. So this is one important first ingredient in understanding what's going on with this discussion around sustainability. And I have overwritten my very short, brief note with protecting life diversification through standards and nature-based solutions. Just a thought. We've just had a panel with participants from all around the world, and also with President Nasheed, the former president from the Maldives. And we just discussed about the following. To protect an island, you can either build breakwater, and 1 meter of breakwater costs $7,000. Or you can do it with nature. 1 meter of coral restoration costs $25. This is a business case. It's quite simple. And now you need to look into the budgets of the states. How much money they do invest in protection activities rather than in solution activities, as nature is providing this to us. And why do I highlight this? If we want to change what we are doing, we need to change the core. We have to bring the topics to the core. Means it's not the problem of the economics, it's rather how we used economics. It is the problem of that GDP is a flow measurement, but nature is a stock. What we measure is, just take the example of Guatemala. What we measure in Guatemala GDP is just the timber we trade when we talk about the value the forest and the forest activity adds to GDP. What we don't add is a systemic effect of nature, which is 60% undervalued in the local GDP. So 60% undervalued activity from nature for our gross domestic product. This is quite breathtaking for us and for me. And especially when we think about then the development of what it means. It means we need to develop accounting standards. I don't want to say that accountants might save the world, but at least with them we can do a lot. Why? Investors at financial markets do trade expectations. Expectations are based on informations. The more imperfect the informations are, the less it's getting traded, or at least the more different the demand supply is. So all the things we've just have touched on are informations which are important for investors to build expectations. And also especially in the context of the mid to long-term perspective, which nature-based solutions are clearly part of. Means if a company starts to report what it's doing with nature, how to factor in nature, like a company has to extract water for its processes, the company also needs to understand what the negative impact of the water extraction is. The groundwater sinks, etc. So you know all these stories. This is something where we need to have a measurement for. Means we need a common vernacular. A vernacular which I call a standard. We have to go away from the understanding that we want to price nature. We don't want to monetize nature, we want to value nature. If we don't value nature, we don't value nature. Quite simple. You know the examples of a whale. $4 million is an intrinsic value of a whale because of conveyor belt, whale pump, all the activities a whale contributes to the health of the oceans as a CO2 sink or sequestrator. Something which is important, not the meat of the whale. Really the activity of the whale. And this is just one example in the chain of examples. And we have to have now to go the way to net positive. ESG is a risk framework which says do not harm. But what we now need to define with the understanding of natural accounting, seeing nature as an asset stock, this together will bring us to the pathway to net positive. From do not harm on top with net positive. And this with the fact in mind that investors are trading expectation based on informations will make such nature-based solutions and companies and investments in this direction not just appealing, also a solution of the predicament we are currently in and we try to solve. So this really just in short and just some food for thought. And I think there's a lot to win. And I think the sign today that we are here discussing with financial sector together this morning, that we had friends from ORA, the Ocean Risk Resilience and Action Alliance we just joined in May. This is exactly how it should be. Cooperation across the different sectors to find the solution for our own future. And we should ask us today, what should we have done at COP26? This should be our guiding question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcus. I will remember COP26 as the COP that I heard what we've been saying for 30 years, Ian, 40 years. I heard now somebody from the financial sector giving that same lecture, and it is amazing, really. And it's exciting that the message is going through. The value of nature is so crucial. We cannot leave it outside any development pathway construction. Are there any questions? I mean, you can send your questions in the Slido. There is this code that you can scan. But even if we have any questions from the audience, it would be really nice.
We need to talk later.
I also wanted to ask you, Ian, why ecosystem services is so difficult to value? I mean, we have identified the ecosystem services. We know the different kinds of ecosystem services. We've tried to monetize them and get the value in order to incorporate them in our investment strategies. Why do you stop there? I always feel a resistance from you.
Okay.
Not biodiversity. Why is it so difficult?
Okay, so actually, first of all, there's, and this very much is in agreement with what you're saying, Marcus, we need to recognise that there's at least three big imperatives that we need to think about here. First is sustainability, and that's the issue of stocks.
Exactly.
I didn't have time to talk about stocks, but stocks are really important. They give you the second thing, which is flows, and that gives you the second issue, which is efficiency. We need to make best use of the resources that are available. So we can't run down the stocks below. You've got to be realistic. You can't say you can't use any resource. What you have to say is you cannot use a stock below a level where you actually start to undermine sustainability. Then you need to think about the efficiency with which you use the flows. And that's where a lot of economics has highlighted the fact that there are huge areas of value that just don't impinge upon most decision making. And it's great to hear that they are getting there in many respects. The third one, which I'm not going to talk about much, but we probably need to be thinking also about distribution and equity and that sort of stuff. But let's answer your question. I'm actually surprised that you think I'm a bit sceptical, because I actually think I'm pretty
I know what you
pretty
think,
gung-ho on the valuation. I actually think you can value most things, actually. I think you can value things to do with the carbon side. We're getting pushed off, by the way. You can look at the water cycle, lots and lots of things. Why do I think that it's very difficult to extend that with regard to biodiversity? Well, first of all, the science often is not there. You picked a very interesting example, the functionality of the whale. Yeah. To actually cycle the oceans and actually impinge upon ocean climate interaction. That's one of the few examples where we have any decent evidence. You ask most ecologists, so not economists, we ask most ecologists about their understanding of the relationship between biodiversity and, say, the water system, nutrient cycling, that sort of stuff, and they'd say, well, it's incomplete. For example, everybody cites the example of pollination. Everybody goes, oh yeah, this is one of the vital things. One of the best ecologists in the world told me once, he said, you never quote my name on this, so I never have, but he said basically this species of bee disappears, probably makes no impact on pollination whatsoever, because other species will just come and take that thing. So you have a problem, because you can't assume that everything is going to be fine, and on the other extreme, it's very difficult to say in any calculus that something is of infinite value. So instead, what we do is we use the best science available to quantify changes in biodiversity and simply say where there is good evidence that we are towards the some sort of crucial level on this. So in other words, don't worry too much about the rats and the pigeons and that sort of stuff. We can lose quite a lot of those. But with most of the other species of concern, we simply can't allow any more net loss at all.
Okay.
And that has to be imposed.
Very clear. I stop you there because there is another question for you, and this will close the session.
Okay.
Under your model for determining, the LEAP model for determining where to plant forests,
Yes.
there is a decision of no loss to biodiversity.
Yep.
Surely we should be focusing only on net gain? This is a
That's a very interesting one. And no loss is much stricter than net gain. Yeah. Much, much stricter.
Of course.
Net gain means you can lose loads of stuff as long as somewhere else you compensate for it. No loss, not net loss. No loss is a much, much stricter rule. It simply says any area where you are going to deplete biodiversity through this project, you're not allowed to do it. So actually, no loss is the strict one.
You are being very risk averse with regards to this, very conservative.
Yes.
Probably because you are afraid of non-linearities and collapse
Absolutely
events.
right.
Okay,
Absolutely
that's
right.
the case.
Femi, yeah.
Okay, we could go on forever, but we cannot because I'm being told that this is the end of our session. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.